We begin this morning right now with devastation across the Caribbean from Hurricane Fiona, the monster storm now taking aim at Turks and Caicos and the Bahamas this morning after slamming into the Dominican Republic and, of course, Puerto Rico.
Fiona barreled through the Dominican Republic as a Category 2 storm, forcing more than 12,000 people to evacuate their homes. The president is expected to declare a state of disaster later today. This morning in Puerto Rico, nearly two-thirds of that island is without clean drinking water. And at the height of the storm there this weekend, the entire island lost power. President Biden has already declared a state of emergency there, and FEMA teams are expected to arrive on the island today to assess the damage. Congress will meet with FEMA later this week to determine how much recovery relief is needed. It has been exactly 5 years since Hurricane Maria, a Category 5 storm, decimated the island, killing more than 3,000 people. Much of the damage from Maria still had not been repaired when Fiona hit. Meteorologist Michelle Grossman is standing by with the latest on Fiona's track, but we're going to start with NBC News national correspondent Gabe Gutierrez, who's in Puerto Rico with the latest for us this morning.
Good morning. This is what some neighborhoods in southern Puerto Rico are waking up to. Down trees, down power lines, no running water. We even just saw more rain here overnight, but thankfully the floodwaters in this neighborhood have started to recede. Still, the toll on Puerto Rico and the Caribbean has been devastating. At least 3 people are dead in Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. This all comes after Hurricane Fiona strengthened overnight to a major Category 3 hurricane, and it's now heading toward Turks and Caicos. Meanwhile, here in Puerto Rico, the governor says that more than 2,000 people were in emergency shelters. More than 1,000 people had to be rescued from neighborhoods like this one. Yesterday, we spoke with residents here who told us how they had to race out of their homes, picked up by municipal officials when the floodwaters raced in. This is the most rain Puerto Rico has seen in this neighborhood, the most they've ever seen, even more than Hurricane Maria, which, by the way, hit Puerto Rico exactly 5 years ago today. The governor says that he hopes that power will be restored in the coming days, not months, like it was during Hurricane Maria. But still, there are many questions here in Puerto Rico about how long the power will be out and how long before water is restored. About 2/3 of this island are still without running water. Back to you.
All right, Gabe Gutierrez, thank you so much. Let's bring in John Morales for a closer look at this storm and where it's headed next. He's a meteorologist and hurricane specialist at NBC6 in Miami. John, good morning to you. So the headline of Hurricane Fiona really is the rainfall. Some early estimates show the rainfall in some areas of Puerto Rico actually exceeded that of Maria, and that's causing widespread flooding and mudslides. What brought about all this rain, and how rare is it to see such high amounts of rainfall come with a Category 1 storm?
Well, good morning to both of you. And because it was moving slower across the area, it was able to dump more precipitation across Puerto Rico, across a wider swath, too. You know, for Maria, there were comparable maximum rainfall amounts compared to Fiona, but they were more localized. In this case, a good portion of Puerto Rico has seen 2-3 feet of rain accumulate in the span of just a couple of days. And as a matter of fact, there's one spot north of Puerto Rico's second largest city, which is Ponce, that received 15 inches of rain in 3 hours on Sunday. That is a 1 in 500-year event. So Category 1 hurricanes can be very, very wet, especially if they are slow moving.
So that's a good point, John. Rare events becoming more common. And, you know, this is just the midway point right now of the hurricane season. And the Puerto Rican government is already warning of another storm that could make landfall this coming weekend. So I guess the question is, how much is climate change right now playing a role in these storms? And is this kind of the new future of the Caribbean?
So climate change is definitely impacting the strength of hurricanes. It's also impacting the movement of them. So we are seeing a greater proportion of hurricanes reach Category 3, 4, and 5 intensity across the planet. It's not that we're seeing more necessarily tropical storms across the globe, but again, a greater percentage of them are becoming catastrophic. The movement of them being impacted by a wavier, weaker jet stream, a connection between the rapidly warming pole polar regions versus the rest of the planet, meaning that the jet stream is slower, it meanders more, and hurricanes therefore move slower as well and can deposit more rain. And one final factor, a warmer atmosphere can hold more moisture in it. You can squeeze out more rain from hurricanes due to climate change.
So, John, we've seen Fiona strengthen to a Category 3 storm. It's already brought destruction to the Dominican Republic. That's the first hurricane to make landfall on that island in 18 years. So why doesn't the Dominican Republic see more hurricanes, and what's some of the damage we're seeing left behind there now?
Well, it's interesting. I think it's pure luck. Just like the state of Florida just a few years ago, between 2005 and 2018, had not seen a hurricane. Well, the same deal for the Dominican. I mean, it's Hispaniola as a whole is a pretty large island, so they had been pretty fortunate in that sense. For the Dominican Republic, last night especially, in the tailing edge of Fiona, we saw very heavy rain rates, possibly even higher than had been seen when the core of the hurricane was over land. So this morning in the Dominican Republic, I am sure they're seeing scenes very similar to what was seen in Puerto Rico on Sunday and Monday. And for the Dominican, this is definitely going to be a big damage maker, as well as, unfortunately, potentially causing some fatalities.
John Morales, appreciate your expertise. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
So we've seen these massive accumulations so far, and now Fiona is a Category 3 hurricane. Meteorologist Michelle Grossman joins us now, and the path continues with portions, Michelle, of the Caribbean certainly holding their breath right now.
Hey, Michelle.
Hi there, guys. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And John said it perfectly. We're looking at these storms that are moving slower. So we're seeing the storm moving about 15 miles per hour, and that's really slow, and it's holding a lot of moisture. We're seeing those life-threatening landslides, life-threatening mudslides. So this is the latest here. We're looking at a major storm in terms of Fiona. It's going to be possibly a Category 4 storm, especially as it passes by or over Bermuda. So we're going to be watching that over the next couple of days. But we do have alerts in place. Where you see the red, that is a hurricane warning for Turks and Caicos. We also have a tropical storm warning. That is in the orange for the southeastern portions of the Bahamas. So that's the bullseye for today. And then as we go throughout tomorrow, we're going to see better conditions there. It's Thursday into Friday where it's going to impact portions of Bermuda. And again, it could pass right over the island. So as we go throughout time here, by Thursday at 2 a.m., we are looking at 140-mile-per-hour winds. Could see a Category 4 storm. That is the same story on Friday. And then it holds its strength for quite a while after Bermuda. And the northern parts of the Atlantic are still so warm. We have a really warm marine layer. And we're going to keep that strength. So by the time it gets to the kind of Atlantic Canada, we could see a very strong extratropical storm. That could be a historic storm for them. So we're going to watch that very closely. Here is the setup here again. We're looking at that warm Atlantic bathwaters. That's why we saw the strengthening overnight. It's turning over those really warm waters. It's strengthened to a Category 3 storm. Will strengthen to a Category 4 storm eventually. And we're going to see those destructive winds possibly in Atlantic Canada. So that will be by this weekend. Now, the East Coast, we're going to still be spared on the East Coast. We're still expecting that turn to the north and also to the east, but we're expecting swells, dangerous beach conditions from New England all the way down to the southeast. Could see strong rip currents as well. So if you are intending to go out in the ocean, again, you want to use all the common sense and follow the rules when you are in those waves. We are also watching another system. We have two systems, really. 40% tropical development in the next 5 days. We have one that's 60%. So it seems like the Caribbean's just getting turned on now. It was a really slow start to the season, but we're really seeing some systems now. That's one story. Another big story is another heat wave. We're looking at a big area of high pressure that's pumping in all that hot air. So the jet stream so far to the north, we're looking at temperatures in the 80s, the 90s. Temperatures 10 to 30 degrees above what is average for this time of year. So fall arrives on Thursday. Still feeling like summer in so many spots. 100 degrees in Dodge City, 97 in Kansas City. Chicago, 17 degrees above normal at 89 degrees. Cincinnati, 87. This heat will move off to the east as we go throughout tomorrow, so still well above normal in so many spots. Cincinnati, 93, 16 degrees above average. Memphis, 101, 93 in Atlanta. Charlotte, 92. And there's that area of high pressure. Sort of acts as a heat pump, just pumping in that moisture and also the heat. So we have the humidity in place. We have the heat in place. We have the trigger of a cold front. That's going to spark some strong to severe storms in the upper Great Lakes. We could see some hail. That's going to be the biggest threat. Also some damaging winds, some really heavy downpours. Any of these storms that come through through could drop a lot of rain in a short amount of time. Now, we have a low tornado risk, but notice it's not in zero. So that's something to watch throughout the afternoon hours. This is the setup. We have that area of low pressure. We have the heat and humidity. We have that cold front that is moving to the south. So we're going to see rain departing in New England. We had a really wet day yesterday. It's winding up today. And then we're going to see those strong storms for Wisconsin, also Michigan. That's going to stay in place. We're going to move off to the east tomorrow. So then we start to look at the Ohio Valley, portions of the lower Great Lakes. So New York, also Pennsylvania could see a severe threat tomorrow. The biggest threat, once again, being winds, hail, and also the chance of some really heavy downpours. So we're looking at rainfall totals anywhere from 1 to 3 inches. Where you see the darker colors, the yellows, even some oranges, we're looking at 1 to 3 inches in some spots within some of those storms. And that's going to be a big story as we go throughout the next couple of days. This heat wave lessening tomorrow. So it's not a long heat wave like what we saw in California, but still seeing the chance for some really high temperatures well above normal for this time of year. Back to you guys.
All right, Michelle, thank you very much. Turning now to Mexico, where a 7.6 magnitude earthquake struck the country's west coast and rattled buildings as far as Mexico City. The country's president said that one person was killed in the port city of Manzanillo when a wall collapsed at a mall. Now, there was no other major damage that's been reported so far at this time. And officials said that the quake does not pose a tsunami risk for other areas in the Pacific Ocean.
Adnan Syed is back with his family this morning after a Baltimore judge overturned his conviction in the 1999 murder of his girlfriend, Heyman Lee, and ordered his release from prison.
Yeah, there are questions right now, Joe, regarding whether Syed received a fair trial, which started to arise after the case was featured on the popular Serial podcast back in 2014. And the judge said that prosecutors did make a compelling argument that Syed's conviction was flawed.
Becky Feldman subsequently led nearly a year-long exhaustive investigation reviewing the substantive facts of this case, where several problematic issues were presented, and thereafter leading my office to file a motion to vacate the conviction of Adnan Syed.
NBC legal analyst Danny Cevallos joins us right now. Danny, good morning.
Good morning.
Break this down for us as we find out that prosecutors now have identified 2 alternative suspects, potentially exculpatory information. How does that not get out beforehand? And what are they arguing here?
They've identified 2 alternate suspects, but they haven't identified them. In other words, they are just referring to them as one of the suspects. And in a short summary, they've alleged essentially that one of the suspects threatened the victim. One of the suspects had a history of assaulting, including sexual assault. So these are all things that should have been disclosed to the defendant under the Brady rule, which means that if the prosecution or the state has evidence that's exculpatory, it's material to guilt or innocence, they have to turn it over to the defense. Now, your second question is my question. With all the attention on this case, is there any other case that has gotten more attention than the Adnan Syed case? Why was it not disclosed if it was known to the prosecution at the time? And the answer is, as a criminal defense attorney, a jaded criminal defense attorney, is that, well, this happens all the time. And the reality is, especially in state courts, these cases are mass processed. There's a lot of sloppiness, both on defense and the prosecution side. And this is something that was somehow missed, even during the appeals and post-conviction attacks. And somehow only now, in 2022, does the state finally say, 20 plus years later, there might have been some evidence that we should have disclosed to this defendant.
We don't think you're jaded. We just think you asked good questions. So, and on top of all that, you've got in 2016, there was a Maryland judge cited doubts over the cell phone evidence, which was a big part of the podcast, over why there should even maybe be a new trial in this case. So why has it even taken long since that to get to this point?
Because the mere fact that there may be newly discovered evidence, and you see this in the procedural appeals process for Syed's case, it's not enough that there may have been evidence that the defense should have known about. Another key problem for the incarcerated challenging their convictions is whether or not their attorney raised it. Because there's this rule, a use it or lose it rule. In criminal cases, if your attorney doesn't object or raise the issue at the trial court level, often it is lost forever. A decision made by your attorney, not by the actual defendant, that may have effects for the rest of the case. So if the attorney doesn't raise the objection, it might be waived. And you see that throughout the appeals process. Courts at each level of the appeal saying, this might have been an issue, but Did the defense attorney properly raise it? And does she have an excuse for never raising it? Again, the defendant ends up being held accountable for the attorney's mistakes.
So the ball was dropped legally from multiple vantage points here.
Yes.
But I guess the question now is, we've talked about all of these complications. Syed's name isn't cleared yet. What happens next?
Okay, now this is an exclusive you're getting just from me. You probably won't get it anywhere else. This is my theory. The prosecution now has 30 days in which to retry the case. They will quietly ride off into the night. That's my theory. They will not retry Syed. The reason is this. Maryland recently enacted a wrongful conviction statute. Notice in the motion, the state said, well, we think there were irregularities, but we're not saying he's innocent. Now, why go to all that fanfare to say, we don't necessarily think he's innocent? Well, again, this may be jaded defense attorney talk, but when you look at the wrongful conviction statute in Maryland, it requires essentially an actual innocence standard. In other words, for Syed to get paid, to submit an invoice to the state of Maryland for wrongfully convicting and incarcerating him, he has to be actually innocent. The statute uses a slightly different term. But if the state in its motion said, well, now we think he's innocent, they've essentially put the state of Maryland on the hook for compensating Syed. And they're not ready to do that yet. They'd rather make Syed work for it, and work for it, I guarantee he will. The next step is likely, if they choose not to retry him, a civil filing or whatever the procedural equivalent is in Maryland.
All right. You'd have to think he's taking legal action.
Yeah.
Danny, thank you so much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.